Hello, and welcome to the end of 2022 with the Storied Arcs podcast. I'm your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we are doing a special thing. We're giving ourselves 1 week off of reading an entire graphic novel. And we're going to look at, not backwards to 2023, but forward to 2022, not backwards, forward to 2023. And we're just kind of, this is like hitting record a half hour before we normally do, where we kind of talk about our selection process, what goes into picking the series that we do. Obviously, once we have, if by the end of 2023, Twitter is still a thing, seems unlikely at this point. If it is and people are interacting with us and, want to throw things out there for us, that'd be great. Alex appeared on another podcast a few months ago where you gave a for instance of a book that we wouldn't cover because there's not enough meat on the bone, and it was Shirtless Bear Fighter.
Yes.
And then you were lambasted on Twitter for that.
Yes, yes.
So that happens. Shirtless Bear Fighter, honestly, I had it on... I've got a few buckets for my list here of my wish list for 2023, which is what we're going to talk about. We're going to say, here are some things we might cover. Here are some things we would love to cover. Here are some things you should read, but we're not going to cover it, and here's why. And there's a few different buckets there. But one of my buckets is not enough meat on the bone. And Shirtless Bear Fighter had to move from that one to the unfinished / in progress because they're still writing that, as did Royal City by Jeff Lemire, since that's getting a continuation, as did, Twig by Scotty Young. So all of those things, we'll get there. But I think I have a longer list, but I would imagine there's a fair amount of overlap. So you want to start with maybe not enough meat on the bone?
Sure. I'll start with the fun one. It's a book that it's a silly premise. It's you're back in World War II, you're fighting Nazis, and you come across an island of dinosaurs. And this is Half Past Danger by Stephen Mooney. It was published on IDW. It has two series. The first one, series one, just called Half Past Danger. The sequel called Half Past Danger, Dead to Rights. Dead to Rights. Okay. It's just it's not a silly book. It's a silly premise book. It's a war story. Again, we're fighting Nazis and there are dinosaurs involved. And it's just it's a really fun ride. Stephen Mooney writes and draws and does the whole shebang with it. It's his story, and it's just it's a fun world. I can't even call it like alternate history. I have another book that might fall under that we could probably classify as alternate history. Half Past Danger is just a fun fantasy book. With some, real world grounding, but there really isn't there much to talk about. Again,
Man,
Nazis
I love
are bad.
These covers.
Nazis are bad. Dinosaurs are cool. The covers. It's got a real pulpy feel to it. Obviously, being set in the early 1940s, 1943, I think, for the first book. It's just it's a fun one to go out and read. That Mooney put a lot into, and it's a great kind of real quick, probably one afternoon, you can probably knock out both the volumes. So,
just going on the cover art, I'm going to say it looks like one of the things that might be on the drawing board for like an Indiana Jones movie, where it's like, a sci-fi bent, but it's a period piece. That's
actually, I mean, you say that based on the covers. That's actually a really, really fun comp, I think, in terms of the vibe.
Rocketeer,
vibe. I would say a little more Indiana Jones, because it's your real world. It's grounded in the real world, set in the real world settings. Your bad guys are Nazis, and yet there's this one just little bit of twist to it, that supernatural fantasy bent. I think that's a great vibe. And if Indiana Jones at some point had fought or encountered dinosaurs, like, it wouldn't after
Look,
Crystal
George
Skull.
Lucas has another one coming. Let's not rule it out.
Was it Dial of Destiny? Who knows? Dinosaurs wouldn't have wouldn't have been too out of place in the Indiana Jones universe. And so, yeah, Half Past Danger really falls into that same kind of vibe, that same kind of feeling. So, no, that's a really good comp. If you enjoy those movies and kind of the pulpiness of them, I think you'll find joy in Half Past Danger. There's just not a lot to discuss there in terms of like what's the greater meaning behind experimenting on dinosaurs and all that and using them for war. This isn't like Jurassic Park. They're not going down that route.
Yeah. Although, open it up to sequels, maybe they could.
Maybe so.
I'm sure Chris Pratt's available. So for my not enough meat on the bone, probably ironic given the title, I have Chew, which is just really fun, like campy detective premise. 60 issues. I truthfully have not finished it, and part of it was like I'd like to cover it because I would like to finish reading through it all, but once you get past the premise of like he's a detective that once he eats something from the crime scene, he gets like premonitions of it, which is like I don't there was a lot of similar things in the air at the time. That's 2009. There was a show called like Pushing Daisies where like the detective could touch the dead body and they would come back to life and tell him how they died, but obviously he couldn't use that evidence. And then there was Psych, where the guy was pretending to be psychic. So there was always these like detective with a twist in the 2000s era, and Chew was just one of those. It's just like there's not much to say about life. That's kind of like it's like doing a Sherlock Holmes book club or something. It's like, oh, it's really fun.
Yeah, we'll just talk about the case, right? And
yeah, you talk about the details of the case, and it was fun, and that's all there is. But anyway, if you're looking for something to keep you busy, it's 12 collected trades and then a follow-up series, Chew CHU, and that was all by John Layman and Rob I forget the artist's name. See, that's why we have 0 episodes when we do regular comics, is because we research things rather than shooting from the hip. Okay, do you have another one?
Yeah, I
not
do.
Enough meat on the bone.
I do. And it's a series that has, I'm looking up right now, it went 54 issues. It has 14 trades, but it's unlike anything we've really discussed or anything would discuss. And it's Giant Days from Boom Studios.
Oh yeah.
Written by John Allison. The initial art was done by Lisa Tryman, and then the series regular artist became Max Sarin. And it's just it's an irreverent slice of life comic about 3 girls in the UK who become friends when they move in, like they're neighbors in the same dorm. They move into the University of Sheffield, and it just follows these 3 girls. And it's just an incredibly warm and just fun comic. The initial art by Lisa Tryman is great, but Max Sarin has some of the best facial expressions, I think, in comics and with these characters. They do such a great job. And John Allison has this entire what's called the Bobbins verse. He's this prolific webcomic author, and he has all of these different comics that have been, some are just webcomic only, some have been printed. Let's see some of the titles. There are Bobbins, Scary Go Round, Bad Machinery, Giant Days. They're all connected. They all have characters at like different points in their lives, different ages. They cross over. It's very expansive. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, you can. If you just want to read Giant Days and read this story about these 3 girls at school, you can do that, and it's wholly satisfying because the character work is so spot on. It for just being a slice of life comic where you just follow them, and it's wacky and irreverent and all of that, but it's just a really beautiful, very simple book. We don't have capes and cowls. There's no superhero aspect, all this stuff. It's just a slice of life book. That's just, it's a really heartwarming read. That's just it's a lot of fun. And I really think one of the selling points really is that I think the artwork is is so fantastic. It's so colorful. It pops off the page, and it's super, super expressive. The way that Max Sarin draws the characters, all the characters with their eyes, everything about it is just so wonderful. And it's a great book that you can just I like to pick up and go back through and read, and sometimes just flip through the pages just to go through the art and see it, because it's very warm and comforting, and it's a very it's a very welcoming read like that.
Yeah, so I guess that's a great one to bring up the distinction between like that and Paper Girls, because like the relational dynamic is a similar beat to Paper Girls, but Paper Girls also has the time travel element, and it's got a little more longer scope of commentary on older versions of yourself talking to younger versions of yourself. That was what made that have a little more meat on the bone. If it was just the small time story about 4 paper girls on a route, that'd probably still be a great story.
And also I think that kind of time travel story can work as well, but what they did so well was you mesh those two. There's the grounded relationship between the 4 girls that holds it all together throughout this very wacky and out there time travel, multi-generational
the
war that goes on.
Adventure.
And Giant Days is just following these girls through life as they try and navigate school and relationships and friendships, and what happens when you graduate and all that stuff. It's very basic stuff, and it seems very mundane, and it is very mundane, except that's what life is. Life is navigating the mundane like that, and maybe finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. And it said the stakes are relatively low because it's not ending the world or anything like that. But like when it's your life, the stakes are actually pretty big. So it's a wonderful read, with a tremendous amount of heart behind it.
Very cool. And I haven't read it. I've just always admired the cover art.
It's beautiful art, beautiful art.
Just very cool look. So some of these I start to cheat and blur the line in their categories or people, but this was like a for instance, like 4 kids walk into a bank. It's another one on my list where
almost on my list. I thought about it.
Super fun, not much to talk about, but I love Matthew Rosenberg, and I especially love basically everything Tyler Boss is doing creatively. Really good at drawing complex adolescent characters. He did 4 kids walk into a bank. He's currently doing What's the Furthest Place from Here.
Also with Matthew Rosenberg.
That's right. And We Can Never Go Home on Black Mask. And there's one other series that Tyler Boss did where it was like
We Can Never Go Home. Also Matthew Rosenberg.
Are they always together?
I don't know if they're always together, but those three.
So
those
like I know Matthew Rosenberg does Big 2 stuff. Tyler Boss, I've only seen him on indie stuff. See, again, this is why we do 0 episodes, because otherwise we riff like this endlessly in an episode, and then when the episode's over, we'll be like, okay, let's just cut that out and pretend like we knew it all along in the 0 episode. So that's
but no, I agree. Tyler Boss is great. His artwork is fantastic.
Right. And so I would just love a week to celebrate him, even though none of his What's the Furthest Place from Here
still ongoing.
May end up being the one we can do. Because I've been reading that as it's coming out. It's a unique form of storytelling. I mean, it's like each issue has little chapter breaks in it. So like the issues are naturally dividing the story, but they also have sub chapters, and it just keeps expanding, and there's more and more characters, and it's this kind of dystopian world, but you never get like an expositional drop on what happened, where things are. I assume you'll get that by the end. If not, then it leaves it open for lots of discussion and fodder and speculation.
No, I think that's one we'll definitely have to see how it finishes up, to see kind of, because I do agree. I think that's kind of book that looking back, like either as you get towards the end, like if an end is announced or when it actually is over, you'll be able to connect the dots going backwards and see, okay, this is what they were doing here. This is what this was about. It's hard to connect some of those dots now because right now you're in the middle of the story, you're just kind of grasping for straws. So it's unclear kind of what the story really is about. And, not talking about the narrative story, but like what are they trying to talk about? What are the themes? Is there a greater theme that they're trying to discuss? It's unclear with that story, but I agree. Of the ones you listed right there, I think that would be the most interesting. But I think For Kids is my favorite of those because that's just kind of the most fun. That's like the weirdest one.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, it started a whole trend of this like teenage thing with long titles, which was in the solicit for It's Only a Teenage Wasteland, which just came out December 7th, 2022. It said, if you're a fan of What's the Furthest Place from Here and something else, and books with crazy long obscure titles, you're gonna love It's Only a Teenage Wasteland. So anyway,
Rosenberg has kind of cornered the market on that, although there's some people coming for him. Al Ewing and Simon DeMeo have a book at Boom called We Only Find Them When They're Dead. Jason Aaron just had a new book out on Boom with a trio of artists that's called Once Upon a Time at the End of the World. So we have they're making it tough on comic shops and buyers because you only have so much room on the tab in your comic box. So you got to get creative.
That's where they start to use the acronyms. Do you have any more for Not Enough Meat on the Bone?
I think
I can rapid fire a couple.
I think I do. I've got one that would definitely fall into that category. So I'll get there now. I'll do that one here. And that's Lady Killer from Dark Horse. It's 2 volumes. The first volume was written by Jamie Rich, who's a longtime editor at DC, among other places. He wrote the first volume, and the art was by Joel Jones. And volume 2, Jones did both the writing and the art there. And it's got a really easy elevator pitch, which is like, what if Betty Draper were also secretly an assassin?
Nice.
So it has that retro 1960s feel, which is, if you're familiar with Joelle Jones's art, and she is one of my favorite artists, whether she's doing covers or interior work, that retro vibe is so perfect for her aesthetic in terms of how she draws characters and how she draws clothing. It's the absolute perfect time frame for her art. And yeah, it's just a bloody suburban mess. As we have this suburban housewife in the 1960s, dealing with the past of also being a killer. Not much to talk about, not much to say. I think there's some commentary maybe about, gender roles in the 1960s and things like that. But, you can get that in a lot of other places, probably a little better. This is more just about having a neat story about a housewife who's also an assassin. So, Lady Killer from Dark Horse. Fun book to read.
Yeah, I think I snagged the first issue, but I just have a stack of unread stuff, and it's there. So it's all out by now, which shows you how far behind I am on my reading.
Oh yeah, it's been but both series have been out for a little while
now. So the other one I had, and this one is kind of on the fence for me, but it's Weatherman by Jody. I think it's pronounced Lehup.
Yeah, Lehup, I think.
Lehup, yeah. So I think same writer as Shirtless Bear Fighter, but
yes.
The pitch for Weatherman is it's a future state of some kind, and this guy, our protagonist, finds out that he's living his normal life and he's a weatherman on Terraform Mars, and he finds out that he's accused of committing this heinous terrorist act. And there's video footage of him doing said thing, but he has no memory of it. And I think the great discussion part of it is he has to decide, if I don't have a memory of having done that and can't imagine a world in which I would have done that, am I really that person? And I think that it even goes into, criminal justice issues and things like that. That being said, I didn't finish the series, so I don't know how it wraps, if it just kind of stays light and fluffy, or if it really delves into those psychological issues, because it's definitely a comedy. even though it's kind of a dark comedy.
it is. There is. I won't spoil it for you, so you'll read it. But I agree. There's an interesting premise there, and not to say that they don't, like kind of land the plane at the end, but I would agree that I think there's not a whole lot there. There's ultimately there were
like
two. There were 2 series
discussion, right?
There were 2 series. Well, it had a sequel, The Weatherman and Weatherman 2. So I think it was a total of either 10 or 12 issues for the whole run there. And they get into that, but I think that story is a little more concerned with the narrative aspect of how does this person choose to regain their memories or things like that. It's a little more focused on that than it is the larger theme of what would this say about a person? What does it say about, like you said, the criminal justice system or something like that? So it's a little more narrative focused and a little less focused on kind of the potential greater theme. But I agree.
So that's
a good read.
Reading into it a bit.
Yeah.
The other one I hit on Not Enough Meat on the Bone, and I expect some pushback on this. But I just wrote James Tynion the Fourth. Like, it's not that I dislike him. It's just, a lot of it's horror and it's good. Does it really, make you sit around and think about life or have to chew on anything? Or is it just really great entertainment? And I'm not saying it's vapid or hollow. It's just like, are there themes in Something's Killing the Children or The Woods, or anything that is like unique that we would talk about?
I would generally, I think the only one, and the only one I thought about putting down, and
Department of Truth.
Yes, that would be under it's currently ongoing. Yeah,
Yep.
The Department of Truth has some. I think there's meat there. There's a lot there in terms of.
It depends where he goes with it. I think it's entirely up to him.
Well, I think how it would potentially end would affect on whether or not we would want to talk about it. But even in terms of what the premise is, just the premise is one of those ideas of like, there's some neat things that you could have discussions about that could have nothing to do with the book, but just the idea that, that's presented there. And I don't want to spoil it, people. So, but it is a fascinating book.
I mean, it's hard to spoil it because even when you read the first trade, you get like inklings of what the premise is.
Yeah, that's true.
But they're not like, here's what this department is. Here's exactly what they do. Here's how it works.
I'm trying to think what like the easiest basis level would be is like the idea is that stories and the things people believe can be manifested into reality. And so controlling what does and does not get disseminated out into the world, you can then control the world by controlling what people believe, by giving them, in terms of what they have access to believing or show them evidence of believing, whether you fabricate that or not. If you fabricate a lie and enough people believe it, it becomes a reality. So then have you now lied? The idea is kind of, it's a chicken or the egg thing there. And that's kind of the premise. I think there's something cool about that. And there's a lot to talk about, but in terms of,
I had that on my maybe, but it's unfinished list.
I agree.
And
I'm looking at my list here. I do have one more that I think is a good read, but not much to talk about. So do you have any more on this on
no,
this
that's
category?
why Not Enough Meat on the Bone.
Okay,
list.
then we'll finish this category with my last one here. I mentioned before about the idea of having a alternate history kind of thing, and this is that book. It's called Rough Riders from Aftershock. It's written by Adam Glass and art by Pat Olive, I think is how you pronounce it. It, as the name might suggest, Rough Riders. It's a comic ostensibly about Teddy Roosevelt in the late 1890s. And it is an alternative history comic, and he assembles a super team of kind of mythological and legendary Americans at the time, consisting of
but it looks like vaguely steampunk.
It's set in that area. I think the first book is set in like 1898 or something like that. But his team includes the Rough Riders, which obviously the Rough Riders are a historical thing if you know your history with Teddy Roosevelt. But this group is kind of like a League of Extraordinary Gentlemen that Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill did with literary characters in England forming a super team like your Avengers or your Justice League or whatnot, except here these were historical characters. So Teddy Roosevelt led this team with Harry Houdini, Jack Johnson, Thomas Edison, Annie Oakley, and Monk Eastman. Monk Eastman, I'm sure most people recognize those first names. Monk Eastman was an early gangster in New York, kind of a renowned gangster in the turn of the century New York there. And it's just it's fun kind of your super team up book and alternate history kind of thing. They deal with there's some kind of like sci-fi fantasy elements. Like at one point they go and talk to H.P. Lovecraft. And so it's just this idea of what's this like different little twist on history with these characters if they were all together. What's the dynamic of these characters, and how can we play with history in that way? That again, it's just it's a fun kind of light breezy read. It's got a couple series with it, and then a couple of like small one-shot tie-ins that kind of expand the world. But something that's pretty easy to get through. But again, you're not talking about much unless we would go into real deep dives about like the actual history and saying, well, here's what the comic says, and here's what history. I mean, it's not a history class, but that's kind of what your real meat would be with this story. So in terms of discussion, there's not much there. But like I said, if you like that kind of alternate history, if you like those kind of not even like a what if, but if you like that kind of just a little twist on what the historical record is, Rough Riders is a fun book to jump into.
Yeah, I mean that could almost be the front cover. Could almost be an episode of Legends of Tomorrow.
Oh yeah, yeah.
A show I never watched, but I actually heard great things about it. I just was like only half in on that CW universe, and only for a while.
Yeah,
and it was like, okay, so you took all the characters I hated from every show and dumped them all into one show and expect me to spend an hour of my life each week. No, thank you. Okay, so I think the next bucket should maybe be the unfinished / ongoing stuff that seems like it has potential, because we have the natural segue there from having just talked about Department of Truth, which I think we would both put on that list. Like, that's on you, Jimmy. Finish strong and you'll be on the Storied Arcs podcast. Because right now I think everything about the trajectory of Department of Truth is great. And I'm going to start off the unfinished ongoing one with one that is right on the fence between the first bucket and the second bucket for me. And that is Twig, which just finished its 5th issue. Trade just came out this month. It looks like a children's story. It could be read to children, but it isn't. It has good things to say, kind of a slightly different spin on the hero's journey, and it's got an interesting enough world that I think you could talk about it, but it was pitched as a limited 5-issue series, and at the end of issue 5 it says Twig will return, which I guess means the sales did well enough. And really the motive there is like Scotty Young is one of those guys I would love to talk about. And I don't really know what else we would do other than Middle West.
There's Middle West. And
I mean, I'd love to do Strange Academy, but that's big too, and that's a different bucket.
Yeah. Well, then he did Middle West with artist Tori Corona, and they did another book, another 5-issue mini called "The Me You Love in the Dark," which is I
did like, yes.
which is very good. But yeah, they're I don't know, there's not a lot there. At least now, I haven't read Twig, but I enjoyed Middle West, and I really like The Me You Love in the Dark. I've only read a little bit of I Hate Fairyland, and I Hate Fairyland is that's like Scotty's, like his big kind of independent book at Image that's gone on for a long time. It went away, and then I think it recently just came back, kind of a revamped sequel kind of thing. I've never read that, so I don't know kind of what's in that to really talk about. But yeah, I'm with you there. Scotty Young is one of those guys that he's one of those artists that, because of his unique art style, and I think most of its fans follow him because, like, if he does a cover, a variant cover or something like that, like, people are just they're in on that.
Oh yeah.
They're gonna buy everything he has.
When there's a Scotty cover, it's like
Yeah.
Peach fans, like
Oh yeah,
Peach
Peach Momoko fans.
Peach
Of
will
anything.
buy
Yeah.
everything Peach.
Same with Art Germ. There are people that are like that. But Scotty as a writer, and like I said, he wrote. He was a writer on Middle West. He was a writer on The Me You Love in the Dark, and he's the writer on Strange Academy
And
over at Marvel with Hermoto Ramos. And I think he's, I don't want to say underrated because he has written and drawn his own stuff, but to see,
I know, but I had the same thought.
Yeah, because his art is so well known, you would think any book that has his art on it, his name and his art, just sells. So when he has these other books that he's just the writer on, it's someone else's art. And I love the art. He worked, Jorge Corona and Hermoto Ramos are great. Ramos is one of my favorite artists, even though his characters are a little wonky. I'm used to it now. But and he's not the artist on Twig, right?
No, but the art on Twig is stunning.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
very
cinematically
vibrant, very bright,
beautiful.
very vibrant. Yeah.
And it was a book that made me laugh and had me, like, hit you in the feeling a little bit, and then gave you, like, just enough nuggets to chew on where it was like, this was actually a lot of stuff for a little 5-issue series. Small but powerful was Twig. So
I wonder if we could maybe do, and maybe not with someone like Scotty Young, but if we could find a creator or a creative team and do kind of what we did with Mark Russell just now.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we could do a month of Scotty Young.
Yeah.
But Twig, Me You Love in the Dark.
I would think we would hopefully just not talk about the books, but try to find some through line. Cause as we discussed, there is a social commentary through line, as oblique as it may seem at first, between what he did on the Flintstones and what he did on Not All Robots.
You're actually kind of stealing my pitch for when we get to the big two.
Okay.
Yeah.
No.
But I loved that.
That's potential and idea. Yeah.
But this December doing the Mark Russell Spotlight has been the highlight of the podcast for me. First of all, I just love his work, but I really loved finding two completely juxtaposed premises, and just talking about how similar they are, but also here are the things that you can say in a Flintstones book that you couldn't say in Not All Robots, and vice versa. Super fun doing that kind of contrast on an artist. Okay, so unfinished, ongoing. What else do you have on that list?
The first one I have is Monstrous by Marjorie Liu and Sana Takeda.
Sure.
And now, even though this is unfinished, even if it were finished, I don't know if it's something we would do because the size and scope of the story is so huge. I mean, this is truly an epic fantasy storytelling comic, and it's a wild ride. I think there are 40 some odd issues in, and they're kind of on the Saga release track now, where they were off for a while. Not as long as Saga was, but they came back and they had 6 issues this year, and they're coming back again. Another arc will be in January. So it's kind of like they're not doing kind of fully ongoing every single month, because Liu and Takeda are also doing kind of the Brubaker Phillips thing, where they have a set of original graphic novels, and they're doing a trilogy of novels. The first one came out recently called The Night Eaters, and that's going to be the first of 3. So on top of taking care of the ongoing of Monstrous, they're doing this other kind of larger releases of graphic novels. But if you like big epic fantasy stories, it's got this steampunk vibe mixed with like East Asian mythology and lore. Obviously, both creators being of Asian heritage, Asian descent. It's a multiple Eisner Award-winning comic. It's notable because Marjorie Liu in 2018, she was the first woman to ever be awarded Best Writer at the Eisners. And even then that year, she co-won with Tom King. But still, in the 30 some odd years that had been given, and in Monstrous's second or third year of publication. Like it had been nominated before for like, best new series and the best continuing series. And then in 2018, it won 5 of the awards. I think all 5 it may have been nominated for that year, but it's a absolutely stunningly gorgeous book. Sonic Takeda's art is just like mind melting, out of this world. But the story is so big and there's so many parts to it and it's so intricate. There are a lot of characters, a lot of forces. There's this giant war going on between these kind of different magical if you like high fantasy, if you're into all of that, this is a book for you. But in terms of the kind of things we talk about, like there's really not much there. I don't know what we would discuss in the kind of way that you and I might like to discuss books. I just don't think it fits in that way. But it is a absolutely gorgeous book that I think people should, that I want more people to read, as many people as possible to read, because I said it's incredible storytelling, both just visually and the words on the page. It's an awesome book.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another one, and this again, it's both unfinished and it's murky whether we would do it. But I have Undiscovered Country.
Sure.
And there's a couple reasons for that. One, fascinating premise. That America becoming an isolationist nation. I know, really far-fetched in 2016, or I guess it started later. But it was in the Trump era, where it was in the Brexit era of all these populist movements, and America had gone totally off the grid in this book. And it's like, well, what is that like a few years down the line when it devolves into an idiocracy dystopian world where no one else in the world is allowed in, and a rescue team goes in and is discovering the country with the reader. So great vantage point for storytelling, and that was Scott Snyder and Charles Soule.
As writers,
writing that together.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, I love Scott Snyder. How many chances are we going to have to talk about him on this podcast? It's maybe that or AD After Death. He does a lot for DC. And I like what he does on DC. It's just not what we do on this podcast.
Yeah.
So anyway, that just finished, I think, like its 24th issue, which would be like its 4th trade. It was not a series wrap yet. So I don't think Image considers it like a new tentpole comic. It's not going to go for 193 like The Walking Dead. But they're going to see how long it'll go.
I think they wanted it to be that. I mean, it came out in a time when I got to think exactly when it came out, but there was a lull period there when The Walking Dead abruptly ended and Saga still wasn't back, and they were looking for that
and
that
Boom
consistent
was
selling.
off.
Yeah, and Undiscovered Country was one of those, because it was huge names behind it. It said Scott Snyder and Charles Soule as co-writers. I believe the art, the pencil art, the line art is done by Giuseppe Camuncoli. So there's our, he'd done a lot of work on like Marvel. He did Spider-Man for a while with Dan Slott. It was meant to be a big book. And I think it's one that, like, it sold really well. Obviously, it's big new #1. And then I don't want to say they've tailed off, but I think it's plateaued at a level now where it's not the hit I think they were maybe hoping it would be, given the kind of the names of the people behind it. So not to say that it's bad, but
No, it's just, yeah, it's like, if a premise like Saga had gone kind of mid-level, and there was like one 6-issue stint of Saga where I thought, this is mid-level, but it was so far in that I was already committed and I knew it would rally. I think it was like a whole 6-issue thing where they're on that like abortion planet. I was like, this one just kind of sucks.
But yeah, I Undiscovered Country is interesting. I'm up and down with that series. I do think it started strong, and then I think it got, in my view, I think it got some of the characters got a little tropey, and there's the one character that's like the old America expert. Like he's like walking Wikipedia. He knows like the model number of every piece of technology. Like he just knows it. You're like, come on, dude, really? Like he has the full pop culture knowledge of our America current day, which is the comic America's past.
Right.
Like he just has all the answers. He knows what all the pop culture things were. He's always there to inform it, and I find that character a little grating and a little irritating. But
He's Abed Nadir from
yeah,
Community.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Except he's existing in a world where he didn't live or experience anything he knows. To
right.
his base of knowledge is his past, which is our present, and yet he's completely fluent and versant in everything, as if he were someone living in the late 20th century, early 21st century. Like he's contemporary, even though he's one of the younger kids on in this comic. So a character like that, little bit irritating to me, but I think there is a neat premise there, and that's kind of one of those things that maybe if it does end, however it ends, how it wraps up, how it pulls everything together, maybe something we could potentially go back and take a look at.
Yeah. That being said, I only read the first trade, maybe the second one. I maybe made it into the teens, but I just stopped because when something is going on and I don't know how long, and they take breaks, I'm like, I'll just catch it all in trade. So
yeah, see, but you're the reason why things get canceled then, because you stop ordering books.
I know that. But the series that I like love, they make their money back on me because like Ascender, for instance, which we'll get to later, I bought in single issue, and then I bought each trade when it came out, and then they released this deluxe edition that matches my Descender deluxe editions. So for all of Descender and Ascender, I bought the 30 issues plus the 15 issues, 6 trades and 3 deluxe editions. All new. They made their money back on me. Image, you're welcome. That's all I have to say. Okay, so any more unfinished ongoing?
Yeah, and this one actually kind of falls in the middle of our last two kind of buckets as well, which is Lazarus from Image, by Greg Rucka and Michael Lark. It's ongoing, allegedly. A few years ago, it wrapped up its kind of monthly issue releases because both Rucka and Lark were slow on both their ends. It came out more infrequently, and then they made an announcement like it's going to come out quarterly now, like oversized square bound issues, and that came for a little while, and then even quarterly releases got delayed, and now it just kind of comes out when it comes out, and I think
I would have told you it was canceled. I didn't, or like over. Yeah. I didn't know it was still going.
It's the story is still ongoing, and they will get to it at some point. But it's just a matter of kind of when. So on one hand, it's ongoing. We're not going to get to it. On the other, like it's a neat premise. I think it's a cool premise on kind of the eternal warrior trope. This is a dystopian future where countries no longer exist and families rule the world. They're basically big fiefdoms. And so each family controls a large swath of territory. And you have serfs who live in, who live and work under the family. You have people who live out in the waste who are kind of unaffiliated and all that. And each family has a Lazarus, which is their protects their family. It leads their army. It speaks with their voice. It's their messenger. And that's kind of how they do battle and do business. And the series focuses on the Carlisle family, which is they control the western half of North America, and their Lazarus, whose name is Forever Carlisle. And it's just it just deals with kind of this world and how these families interact and kind of the grudges and the battles, the wars, the alliances. There's some Game of Thrones palace intrigue in there. But it's just it's a cool sci-fi. I guess it falls under sci-fi. I guess kind of a soft sci-fi, soft fantasy kind of book. It's got some really, really great characters in it. Rucka's an amazing writer, and Michael Lark is an artist whom I absolutely love. I think Mike, you and I were talking about, one of the potential big twos, not to spoil anything down the road, but maybe we talk about doing Gotham Central. And that's where Rucka met Michael Lark. Michael Lark was the main artist on that, while Rucka and Ed Brubaker handed off the writing duties. And so they went from that and started working on this book, Lazarus. And so it's just it's a really neat book. It's a really cool book. I think it's very character driven. Characters are very, very cool. You meet all the different Lazari from different families around the world. And it's just it's a neat premise, but not something that I think we would be talking about because there's not a whole lot there. There's a little bit there with some like bioethics in terms of maybe, I don't know, how one would live forever, pharmaceutically, cybernetically, things like that. There are different ways the families do different things, but in terms of like broad, larger topics, there's not much there. But the world they create, the world of Lazarus is really cool. The setting is really cool. And like I said, it's populated with some really awesome characters.
Yeah. The last one I have on that list, there's really not much to say about it because it's going to be so ongoing, I think, would be Radiant Black.
They hope it's going to be a long ongoing. The plan is,
I mean, that's the big, that's the big thing for Image now. I think that's the Walking Dead replacement.
Well, again,
I think it's more of a competitor to Black Hammer. In the way that it's starting to splinter off and have different stories.
Well,
it's not an anthology like Black Hammer.
Yeah, and also Black Hammer is essentially coming to an end. That they're not doing any more work in that universe.
No, but there's a lot there. I mean, I have that one listed as one that would be fun, but perhaps too long for the podcast.
Oh yeah, there's a lot there, but yeah, because there are so many spin-offs and miniseries and all that. But Radiant Black is, I mean, I think again, I don't mean to demean it. It's a fun book, but it doesn't have the sales. But it is something that Image pushes pretty hard, that whole universe, and not just the Radiant Black universe, but there's also the oh man, what do they call it? The Supermassive. Like they have their own like superhero world, because there's another character, Rogue Sun, I think it is, that there are a couple characters that are all in the same connected universe, and then Radiant Black has its own multiple spin-offs like Radiant Red and all the different characters, Radiant Pink. It's basically a Power Rangers kind of tweak. But yeah, I mean that's the kind of book Image would love if it ran on forever or a very, very long time.
Yeah, and I think it can kind of be fun. The same reason that I would want to talk about Black Hammer would be the reason I would want to talk about Radiant Black, which is you get like I think someone would have a better time, a modern reader, starting with Black Hammer or Radiant Black and learning a whole comic universe than doing the daunting task of going in and reading some very problematic comics, from the golden era, silver era. If someone was like, or no, I actually had this conversation. Someone said like, "Oh, I loved Shang-Chi. That was a top 5 Marvel movie for me. I want to read comics now." I'm like, don't read the original ones for Shang-Chi. Like, I think they're going to rub you the wrong way.
Yeah.
That'd be like, if someone was really into Black Panther, it's like, maybe don't start with Jungle Action, number 8 or whatever that was. Go to Ta-Nehisi Coates' run. That's a great Black Panther run. So I feel like both Radiant Black and Black Hammer have a lot of the magic and allure of like creating this whole comic hero universe and mythos without having to deal with the baggage of the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s.
I think there is, but I do think there are.
And I'm not saying there's no value. I'm not saying people shouldn't read those. Like,
well, but also,
if you have thick skin and you're not offended, go read them.
Also, if you want to jump into the Justice League or the Avengers or whatnot, anything like those, either the Marvel or DC universe, like, you don't have to jump back to the original comics.
Correct.
Like that's part of the appeal is you can jump in anywhere.
They're rebooting and all the time
reading.
anyway.
Yeah. Or and you don't even have to start at number 1. You can start anywhere and just work your way around. And if you're, an observant enough reader to follow comics, you'll be able to figure out what's happening and what the relationships are and where the story's going. But I think both Radiant Black and Black Hammer and any sort of modern day book that is building off its own like creating its own superhero universe. One of my favorite books that I don't have down listed on this in this exercise is Astro City. And that creates it's a whole superhero universe, but its entire premise is based on the idea that you are at least somewhat familiar with the DC and Marvel tropes of superhero.
Oh, sure. I mean, and Black Hammer banks on that too.
Absolutely. Black Hammer based on that. Radiant Black does as well. The same idea is the idea that not just the expectation of the reader is going to have some of that. In Radiant Black specifically, some of the expectation is that some of the characters have those understandings as well. The characters understands that things, while DC and Marvel may not specifically exist, pop culture exists in the Radiant Black universe. And so the idea of heroes and getting powers and all of that plays into the actual story. So I do think it's helpful to not going completely blind, although at this point, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who goes in completely blind to a superhero universe now. I mean, ubiquity of TV and movies and things like that based around it, even if you don't know
I feel like
the specifics of
even
the comics,
if you've only seen parodies, if you watch Saturday Night Live, you've seen the tropes.
Exactly. You're familiar with what you'd expect there. But yeah, no, Radiant Black's it's a fun book.
All right. Well, let's get to the big two, which is generally we do indie creator-owned comics. I do think we will see more bending of that rule, even though we will draw first from, Image, Boom, Dark Horse, Aftershock, IDW, AWA, those kind of publishers. I don't think we're done with DC because we did the DC Hanna-Barbera already. And I'm certainly not prepared to say never on Marvel. So if you were going to break and bend those rules, where would you start? And I only have one for this category.
Okay. All right. Well then I have a handful. Why don't you go first, since you have one there you want to do?
Well, my one is a cheat, I will say. I'm proposing that for some 5-week month in 2023, we do a month of Tom King, where 1 week we do Vision, 1 week we do Strange Adventures, 1 week we do Sheriff of Babylon, 1 week we do Mr. Miracle. That breaks all of our rules. That's like DC, Vertigo, Marvel, and DC. But the thing is, I think, like Mr. Miracle, we could easily do, I think, an hour on each issue of that. But I also think you can do the whole piece, 12 issues at a time. And I think, like we were saying earlier, that is one where you could read that and not know you're reading Tom King, but you would pick up the themes that are, I mean, we could even do like the much maligned Heroes in Crisis, which was kind of considered a swing and a miss by most people. I still enjoyed it. I mean, in like the Tom King-y way, like I would send someone to Strange Adventures first. But if you've read all of that stuff and you want more, I think you'll enjoy Heroes in Crisis.
That could be an interesting way to approach it. I mean, as you were listing those off, I remember if you go back and think about, and I think he described it this way, his earliest comic work, kind of those first three things he was really known for were the Vision at Marvel, the Omega Men at DC, and Sheriff of Babylon, which is, Vertigo, DC Vertigo. And he once referred to those, I think, as like the trilogy of like good intentions or something like that. The idea of all those books have a through line of people meaning to do well, but ultimately failing miserably at it. The idea that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Sure.
And that is that's a through line, not that specific through line, but there are overall themes in his work. The joke is he writes superheroes staring out windows crying, and that's kind of a summary of what his kind of ethos is. But
when you look at what they've done, there is a place for that. I mean, a lot of these heroes, especially when you read Strange Adventures, I know some readers who are fans of, like, longtime fans of Adam Strange, who were
hated that book.
Pissed. Looking at our comic shop owner.
Hi, Kendall.
For one.
No.
That being said, it's like, hey, that's kind of the beautiful thing about Tom King is he's not typically writing in a continuity, and he doesn't have the constraints of that. It's like, when Mr. Miracle makes a
okay.
climactic decision at the end of the series, it doesn't impact any, well, not just because Mr. Miracle isn't in any other stories right now, but because it doesn't really impact anything.
Yeah.
And the Adam Strange one, that didn't affect the Terrifics or Batman story.
There is, I mean, there's a word choice that I always get hung up on. The difference between a book happening in continuity and happening concurrently. And the one thing that Tom King has always said about his books, that all of his books happen in continuity, which means they don't happen in isolation. But what none of his books that are happening concurrently. So like, it doesn't matter when Strange Adventures happens, really, or Mr. Miracle happens. But what's important is that those stories happen to the characters that you are reading in the other DC books. They are the same character. And so that means the story is in continuity. But it does not mean it's happening concurrently, because none of his books happen concurrently. They are simply an episode at a time in that character's life. And I think that's an important distinction, because you look at all the books that are going on, like when DC does something right now where like the Justice League died again for the 85th time or whatever, there are still Batman books being printed. So like, does it happen before or after he supposedly died in Justice League? It doesn't matter. It's all happening just because they're not happening at the same time. So all of Tom King's books are in continuity. They're just not happening concurrently.
I guess I just feel like it, like Heroes in Crisis. Are we willing to say that the definitive end of the character Wally West is that he's a murderer? Like, is that the continuity where like everyone who ever writes Wally West ever again has to know that the future of that character ends in him committing murders?
Well, no, because it's not about the future. It's about that happened to this character. That doesn't mean he can't move on from it. Someone else is going to write something different. So it doesn't mean that has to define the character. But to say that isn't actually Wally West is
no, I wouldn't say it's not Wally West.
Yeah.
It's a semantic hair to split for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm feeling like he writes a lot of stuff and no one else has to deal with the consequences of what he writes, apart from his Batman run.
Yeah, which is why his miniseries, again, that's the entire point. These are canon stories, but because they don't happen concurrently, no one else he's telling a story about this character that happened to the character you're reading in other books. And that's what's important. It's a character study of this moment in time for that character. It is in canon, which means it can be referenced or cannot be referenced by any other writer that ever comes after him. So
what about when the character dies?
Well, no one ever dies. Like that. Who cares if someone dies? Like, literally, the least important character trait of a character is if they die or not, because they can always come back.
That's true. Yeah, I just don't think anyone's going to be writing the comeback. I think if they use those characters again, they will just write them in without explaining how they came back. Which is why I was getting hung up on the chronology of like, is this Mr. Miracle's end at the end of his story, no matter what anyone else ever writes about him, this is where he will definitively end? Or is this just something and then we, wave a wand and it goes away and he's back?
That's not important. Like, that isn't important.
Oh, I know.
In the story.
Yeah. And I think you have to know that when you read the big two. Yeah. I think those are the kind of rules that a lot of like people who read science fiction and fantasy books get infuriated with comics, because the rules of the universe are not always clear or consistent. They make sense once you have a certain level of like suspended belief, and you just say like, you know what, it's all gonna pan out. I don't like Stan Lee's notion that the characters, you simply create the illusion of change. Like they're very static and fixed.
Well, and also the answer to the question of what is canon is the stuff that's good. Like if you write something and no one likes it, the
Exactly.
next
Yeah.
writer's like, yeah, it didn't, whatever, it doesn't
And
matter.
it's a
So
moving target. Yeah.
yeah. But it is interesting. You mentioned Tom King as like doing a month of Tom King, because one of the books I have on my big two list is Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, which is a book he did recently
Which I
finish
didn't
up.
list, but
Yeah,
yeah.
with that Tom King did with
Great.
artist Bilquis Evely, and it's just it's
That
true
was
grit in
only
space.
eight,
It's
eight
eight
issues, right?
issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true grit in space where Supergirl Kara Zor-El, she's cast as the Rooster Coburn character, and it's just it's incredibly wordy. It's kind of written from like a journal aspect. The young girl she's helping is writing about this either in real time or looking back. I think looking back on the events. So there's a lot of narration, but it's a stunningly beautiful book. But again, there's not much to really talk about. Other than I think it's a really, really good story. But the question then becomes, people ask like, well, when does this happen in Supergirl's story? Like what, it doesn't matter. That isn't the point. This happened to Supergirl. This was an event in her life.
Clearly not a question that Tom King is concerned with.
No, it's never something he's concerned with.
Whoever gave him permission to write the book, that's their problem.
Yeah. So that's one of those books that I think people that you can pick up and just read, and you don't need to actually know anything about Supergirl, because he actually retells the origin of Supergirl in issue 5 or 6, something like that. He actually goes through and retells and uses a lot of the like original dialogue, the original words that were done in her introduction. But it's presented in a very harrowing way, because Kara's story, her origin is really traumatic. But you really have to know nothing about Supergirl to read this story. You can just go in and read a great 8 issues it's true grit. It's great. Let's see here.
Does it end the same way the book True Grit ends? Does she lose her arm?
Well, no, because she is Supergirl. So like she's just she's not losing,
Well, it can grow back.
Yeah.
It's comics.
Yeah. Also on the DC bent, another story that falls in the like, is this in continuity or not concurrently or whatever, which is it's a really basic pick, but it's a book that I think everyone should read, which is All-Star Superman. This is the answer to when anyone ever says, well, there are no good Superman stories. It's so hard to tell. It's the boring character. That people who say that have never read Superman, any Superman ever, as far as I'm concerned. And All-Star Superman comes from Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely. Grant Morrison is a writer that I am fairly hit or miss on, and Frank Quitely is an artist who I am very hit or miss on. But this book, this collaboration, All-Star Superman, is quite possibly the best Superman story in the past, I guess it came out 2005, best 20 years, I would say. It's a fantastic story. The quick synopsis is Superman took in too much radiation from the sun, and his cells are overloaded and he's dying. And so he goes through this series, does a bunch of kind of last heroic acts and tries to make peace with the world and his friends, and as he's about to depart this life. So it's the setup is his life is ending, and it's what would Superman do as he goes towards the end, tries to make connection with the people who only know him as the hero or whatnot. But it's a beautiful story. It's a great story. And like, if you're asking like how to make a Superman movie, it really is just like, do a version of All-Star Superman, do this, and hopefully they don't screw it up. But it's an incredibly basic answer. But if you've never read it, if you've never read Superman, this is the book for you. It tells you everything you need to know, and you get a great story out of it too. And maybe you get turned off by Frank Quitely's art, which I generally am in other things, but this is one that I can fight through and finish reading.
Wow. Yeah, he's just catching strays here.
Look, I don't. Everyone's just a little.
I've never read like a long
pudgy.
Ongoing thing by him, but the art in All-Star Superman never bothered me.
The faces are just a little. They're pudgy and bloated. That's just how he draws it, and I don't know. It doesn't really bother me in All-Star Superman. It bothered me more when they worked on New X-Men together. I
get used to a pudgy and bloated face every time I look in a mirror.
It's there. Yeah. Let's see a couple more here real quick. My last DC one, if you've never read Batman The Long Halloween and Batman Dark Victory by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale.
And maybe as a Sale tribute, we just
Yeah,
do that
yeah.
trilogy,
I
Haunted
mean,
Night.
if
Yeah.
if we wanted to do a sale tribute, we could do those two, and then maybe like Spider-Man Blue and Daredevil Yellow, because those are part of the color. Those are the only two good ones out of the color trilogy they did over at Marvel that Loeb and Sale did. But Long Halloween and Dark Victory
Captain America
are
White was garbage.
that was garbage, and Hulk Gray was not good. I didn't think it was garbage, but it wasn't good.
I didn't read that, but yeah, Mallory Rubin was big on Hulk Gray,
Hulk
and
Gray is okay. I don't think Spider-Man Blue is phenomenal. Daredevil Yellow is really good. Hulk Gray is
and you're not
fine,
even
I
a
think.
Daredevil fan,
I'm
right?
not. I'm not. I'm not. Hulk
Which
Gray is
that's high
fine.
praise.
And then Captain America White, I thought it was really bad, really bad. But anyway, back to Batman: Long Halloween and Dark Victory. These are classic Batman stories. Again, these are the on the list of like Batman stories you have to read. I think these are definitely two that are on there. Again, even if we were to dive into Batman stories, something like that, I don't think this is one we would do. I think we would more likely do something like Hush. I think is a little more interesting as a story that we could potentially talk about. That's like specifically Batman focused, but even that
Yeah.
is really just that's about like, hey, all these characters are coming together. But Long Halloween and Dark Victory, just great stories. The art there by Tim Sale is like, I mean, he was drawing Batman in a way that no one ever drew Batman, even before or since. And it's just a great classic story, kind of rematching the early days of Batman, and Dark Victory is we get Batman and Robin in there. But he said if you've never read these stories, if you don't read a lot of Big Two stuff, I think those are two Batman stories that
I mean, they're great.
Like,
yeah, I just gave them to my uncle who is kind of a literary snob and doesn't really read comics.
Yeah,
and he was like, "Give me more like this. I'll read more of that." And I was like,
more. I could give
I was like, "There's only so much of it, but it is great, and I'm glad he enjoyed it."
The thing, if we did that, another Loeb Sale collaboration, Superman for All Seasons, another beautifully wonderful Superman story.
I never read that.
It's also very great. I do have two Marvel real quick here. One is Marvels by Kurt Busiek and Alex Ross, which is something that there's maybe some things we could talk about. So Marvels is it's a story told from like an everyman in New York City as he experiences the birth of the Marvel universe, starting with the Human Torch, the first Human Torch, and Namor on the cover of Marvel Comics #1, all the way through, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the dawn of the mutants, the X-Men, all that stuff. And it's through the eyes of a character named Phil Sheldon, who's a photojournalist. So he works for like the Daily Bugle and all that. So he's out on the streets taking pictures and photographing all this stuff as if, you were a resident of New York City and when all this stuff is happening. The regular guy on the street, as you're experiencing kind of an outside view, like a third person view of the Marvel universe. And it is a classic story. It's one of the all-time great stories. If you see a list of like greatest trades or comics, graphic novels or whatever, Marvel should be up there. It's and especially now that there is more kind of omnipresence with the idea of who Marvel characters are. People know who the Avengers are thanks to the MCU and all that stuff. I think going back and revisiting the origins in the 60s, now people have more familiarity. They'll see those things and they'll recognize them and see how they were presented, back in the day, initially presented just with this bent of like, you're not following Peter Parker, you're following the guy who's on the street below Peter Parker as Spider-Man swings by. It's that kind of perspective. But it's an awesome book, and Alex Ross's art, this hyper realistic painting is just it's unbelievable. It's one of the most beautiful books you can pick up and flip through.
Very cool. Yeah, well, and what I like about that pitch, and I haven't read that, is I feel like a lot of times that premise is used as like a plotting device in ongoing stories where it's like,
yes,
they'll start a new story arc. Let's take a man on the street observing, Batman or whoever. And sometimes it's like just really poorly done and
Yeah,
it's lazy, and other times it's brilliant and you want to stay with that character.
yeah, yeah.
But then you're
Well,
right back to the old tropey, Batman story.
we think about we actually just kind of had that in Flintstones with the Great Gazoo. You have the outside observer. We're gonna step outside the story and have that issue where he basically narrates what he's seeing in
Right.
Bedrock. Yeah, but this is an entire series where the main character is Phil Sheldon. You are following him and his life as he is experiencing and living through all these, again, wildly traumatic experiences, because every so often, like, Galactus shows up over New York City and is trying to, like, what do you do? Why would you still live in New York? It's the idea of, like, why would you still live in Gotham City after all this time? What are you doing here if every other week, if every other day, there's some crazy supervillain coming through and tearing up the town and killing a bunch of people or whatnot? But
Now listen, I could live. I would stay inside at nighttime. I could live in Sale and Loeb's Gotham City.
Yeah.
I could not afford the liability in Zack Snyder's Gotham City.
No,
where like
tough.
buildings are falling down every other day.
Yeah.
And miraculously being,
Yeah. Yep.
Let me say, it's a great line of work to be a contractor in Zack Snyder's universe.
Yeah.
Just endless work, shovel ready jobs.
Yeah.
Quite literally.
Every other week, something's falling down.
But that's what I was going to say. Just one last thing on the Sale Loeb Batman stuff. I feel like there's a lot of Batman wars amongst fans, of movies and stuff like that these days, who want I want like the really gritty Batman, really grumpy Batman that Lego Batman kind of parodies in a brilliant way.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the Loeb Sale is quintessential Batman. It is like dark, but it's not just like,
it's not
angry.
Bleak.
Yeah, it's not bleak. It's not angry. Yeah. And it's not cynical either.
No.
And I think just because something is dark, just because he's a creature of the night and he dresses in black and he hides in the shadows and he breaks bones, doesn't mean he's not an upbeat, optimistic character. He actually is. That's why he does all of those things.
Yeah.
And I think they really understand the heart of the character. And I think I'm going to say the Robert Pattinson, the first 2/3 of that movie got the closest to the Sale Loeb Batman. Walking around being a detective, getting in occasional skirmishes. Although, again, he was just a little too jaded.
I would disagree, because I don't think he did any detectiving.
He didn't do it successfully.
No.
He every time he figured something out, it was too late.
Yeah. And he was figuring out literal riddles. Like, he wasn't finding clues. Clues were being left for him. So, like, there's not a whole lot. But we don't need to litigate the Batman.
Well, no, I think that's what would happen if we got into that story.
It might.
We'd get into all of the angry fan trolls out there, and we would criticize every movie that's ever been made.
Yeah. My last one real quick from Marvel is, if you're an X-Men fan or like the X-Men, there's a great series called X-Men Grand Design by Ed Piskor, who writes, draws, colorists, letters, does the whole thing on this, where he basically takes the task of retelling and reframing the first 240 some odd issues of Uncanny X-Men, all the way from X-Men 1 up into the 80s somewhere. I can't remember exactly where he gets through, but he gets into the 80s, the late 80s, I think, where he reframes the entire story as one cohesive narrative without retcons and flashbacks, because as a story is told, you get to issue whatever and it's a retcon for something that happened 30 issues before or something like that. He looks at the story entirely in its entirety and tries to lay it out, and he makes decisions on when different things happen because of when characters are said to have been introduced in the actual timeline, the retcon timeline. He puts it all in one long narrative, and tells the whole story of the X-Men, all the major points and all that stuff. And it's a really neat exercise. If you know the X-Men, if you're interested in the X-Men, you hit all those points. And it's just it's not exactly the way it was in the comics, because he has to make some choices as to when, if there's conflicts or things like that in terms of what the retcons were, things, different writers, different creative teams or whatnot. But he puts it all together in one long narrative, one cohesive long story, and it's a really neat exercise that again, not much to discuss there, but if you're an X-Men fan who has an open mind about storytelling, because there's some people that are like, no, the comic, this is the way it had to go. This character was introduced hand, blah, 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 and it has to come after this and before that. But Pisker does a really cool job just internalizing all the story, like taking it all in and then regurgitating it out in his own way, in his own style. That creates one giant long story, which is pretty neat.
Yeah. So is that the end of your big 2 list?
Yeah, in my big 2 list. Yep.
Okay. I have 3 more buckets, although they're all smaller, faster.
Sure.
The next bucket is creators that we want to repeat, which means we probably will. We just want to space them out.
Sure.
And I'm just going to do a fast rundown. We've only done so many creators. So it's basically, here's what else we'd like to do by the guys we already covered.
Yeah.
Descender, Ascender.
I have one for this list, by the way. So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Descender, Ascender, Jeff Lemire. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna want more Jeff Lemire. Mm-hmm. Dustin Nguyen, just gorgeous artwork in that series.
Yeah.
Little Monsters is wrapping. If I had to choose, I'm still going Descender, Ascender.
Yeah.
Little Monsters is fun, but there's more to chew on in Descender, Ascender.
I agree.
Although I do think there's not that much to chew on. It's not a really dense book in terms of philosophy or thought.
Yeah.
But there's enough to justify it. It's not a total boondoggle, but we might even knock out like 3 trades at a time or 2 trades at a time there.
Yeah.
Another one, and these are Brian K. Vaughan, which would be Why the Last Man, Ex Machina. Not long, but not crazy long series. And Brian K. Vaughan always gives you something to chew on. Then I have Mind Management by Matt Kent.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a great one. In fact, I actually found that one a little too dense because I was trying to read it as bedtime reading in like 2017.
Yeah, it's trippy.
I actually, I had like a frustrating month where I was like trying to read comics while laying in bed, and I started Mind Management and like limped through the first trade, put it down. I was like, I want something lighter, and I switched to the Unwritten.
Yeah.
And I did not make it through past the first trade of that.
Not much lighter.
Right. Oh my gosh. There's so much so much happening, so much trying to figure out the premise. But anyway, those are things that may come up. Repeats, the other ones I had were Sweet Tooth. And again, it's Jeff Lemire. We got to space that out from Descender, Ascender. And that one's just Jeff Lemire. Yeah. So I'm interested in, I would even maybe be as like a special twist for that one. Instead of reading a bunch of Jeff Lemire and saying what are consistent themes, read comparable literature alongside it. Like if you read The Road by Cormac McCarthy and Sweet Tooth,
Jesus, as
like a combo book club, right? I mean, it's a weird pitch, but I'm like, that's what I kept thinking of when I was reading Sweet Tooth.
Yeah.
Which is definitely not the vibe you get watching the show. And I loved the show. I'm very much looking forward to season 2. It's just a totally different beat, and it needed to be because the vibe of Sweet Tooth was very much of its time.
Yeah.
And the zombie kind of dystopian craze has calmed down, and it felt more post-pandemic for the show, which was very appropriate and still faithful to the material.
Yes. I agree.
And then the final thing on my repeats, since I had to repeat everyone we've covered, was Fatale or Fade Out.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Interesting. I have a different, not a Brubaker Phillips joint, but an Ed Brubaker, Steve Epting book, which was Velvet, which I think I've mentioned a couple of times before.
Yeah, you mentioned Velvet. And I'm a big Bond fan.
Well, exactly. I know. I grew up with James Bond. I know you're a fan as well, so I think it'd be a lot of fun to talk about. Again, if you missed the elevator pitch I've talked about, I'm sure I mentioned it during
Zero, I think.
The Zero episode for Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Brubaker and Steve Epting, they created Bucky the Winter Soldier and Marvel. That's their big kind of main creation over there. And they wrote this book Velvet over at Image. And the premise is, what if Miss Moneypenny were actually the most dangerous spy in the world? What if the lady in the front desk, the secretary for the big boss man, was actually like secretly the greatest spy out there, the most dangerous, most lethal spy out there. It's 15 issues, it's 3 trades. It doesn't quite wrap up at the end, but it's an interesting premise. It's a neat idea, and I think again the idea that we're spy fans, specifically Bond fans. It plays obviously on a lot of those tropes. It relies on that. Not relies is tough. It leans on some of that knowledge. It assumes that the reader has some idea of spy fiction, specifically Bond fiction, to kind of work its magic. So that'd be a book I'd love to go through, because I think it'd be a lot of fun going in the espionage world and the spy world there. But again, we got one creator there, Ed Brubaker. We try to space out on before doubling up on.
Yeah, I mean, but again, that's a self-imposed rule, and we don't have to punish ourselves. If there's if it fits to say, we've got this many one shots to do, and like a lot of what we'll be getting into next year. I mentioned the Unwritten that I'm reading right now. I'm reading it because I'm anticipating recording it, and it's like 12 trades. It's a lot, and it's first time for me. You'll have to like dust it off, revisit it.
Yeah, go back through it.
But it's a lot easier to reread something like I did, for Paper Girls or Grass Kings.
Yeah.
It's easier when it's all coming back to you and you're like, I catch this beat. You read it double speed, especially the Unwritten. When you're reading it the first time, you're trying to figure out like what is this universe? Like, what are the rules here? Mm-hmm. What's happening? Why is there a whole page of a website that I have to read now? Just all kinds of different plot devices, storytelling devices.
It is interesting that earlier you talked about establishing rules in the universe, and The Unwritten is a very specific book where the rules are important, and they do establish them. Even
I was thinking about when we were talking about Department of Truth.
Yeah,
right?
You have to accept what those rules are. Whether or not you like them is a different story, but they will tell you what the rules are. They do establish that, and that is very important. That's a critical.
Let me say they bury the lead in that, because I'm like,
they do. Yeah. I think it
you
really
hang
comes
with
to
it for a while.
I think it comes to light in the 3rd and 4th trades. I think it really
you kind of get there. Yeah,
you get it like, here's what's going on, or here's what the setup is. But that's that's a book I think we'll anticipate getting to hopefully early next year. So so is that the end of that bucket of
that is
books?
The end of my repeats. The next bucket, which is a very natural transition, this is another small bucket, are excessively long series. Which is like, I'd like to do this, but we're asking for a big time commitment. Well, you have a lot of them, but
I do.
You didn't write any down.
I didn't choose any for this exercise.
Yeah. So the Unwritten was one. Yeah. Kabuki was another. Mm-hmm. I just, I picked that up. I bought it directly from David Mack, which was cool, at the Cincinnati Comic Expo. Started reading it. I was like, oh, this, not only is it beautiful, I'm having fun with it. And so far, there's plenty to chew on, but there are 4 substantial, collected editions.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a lot of that to do. And then the other long series, since it is coming to a close, I did write Black Hammer down.
But again, Black Hammer is similar to Criminal, where because of it's got different. In Black Hammer's case, it's got a lot of miniseries and spin-offs that it effectively becomes an anthology.
Which I actually thought the pitch for that would be that you kind of get the genre change while staying with a series. And you even get a writer change occasionally.
A lot of times,
Black Hammer
for guest spots.
And Age of Doom. I think each of those are 12 issues, but each of those would be 1 episode. Mm-hmm. But then the one that got renamed. It was like Dr. Star and the Lost Kingdom.
Oh yeah, it became Dr. Andromeda, and then the Kingdom of Lost something.
Tomorrows,
Tomorrows, That's a beautiful one.
I for some reason I thought that looks dumb, and I ignored it. And when I read it, I was like, wait, was that the best one?
That is the best. I believe that's the best spinoff of all they did, and a lot of them are really, really good. But that one
Dr.
is the
Sherlock
best
Frankenstein was also
very
really good.
good.
And so it's like
Barbarian was very good. They're all
and so
very
as you're
good.
reading that, it's like, these
They're
are
They're all different
interesting
genres.
issues.
They're all different genres, all different styles. Because they're different artists, a lot of times different writers. Obviously, but Lemire is kind of the head. Nothing happens without his approval. But some of these he doesn't write.
He is the Stan Lee of Black Hammer.
Yeah, it's his universe. Yeah.
And I guess what I like about it is that it would create a lot of meta conversations about the big two.
It would.
Characters, about the genre tropes, about the histories of these characters.
Yeah.
And it's intentionally inclusive. I mean, it's mostly still white men creators.
Yeah.
But there are, non-binary characters. There are LGBTQ characters.
Yeah. Literal aliens.
Yeah. And so I'm like, from that sense, that's, I guess, part of what I like about it. And to me, it's like, it's not just window dressing on those. They are important parts of each character, but it's not like there's no plot. It's just a bunch of props to make social points or something. It's like, no. There's still a great plot happening. And then the Black Hammer Justice League crossover would be super fun.
Yeah. I think
putting them side by side the way they did.
I didn't put it on my list, but I did mention it, and it falls in this category. But if I had a choice for a super long run to talk about, mine would be Astro City for the exact same reason. It's the idea that the things you'd be talking about would be like, well, look at this Superman comp, look at this Wonder Woman comp, look at this Batman comp. Let's discuss these and see what those tropes are, see how they're presented in the mainstream comic, how we know them, and how are they manipulated here to tell this story, and viewing it through that lens, and all the different facets of the machinations and the different eras of superhero comics and things like that. They're all shown in Astro City, and it would be, I think my fear for that though would be, it'd be a lot of repetitive points there, specific for Astro City. So I don't think we'd ever do it, but it is a book that if you love superhero comics and want a different twist on it, Astro City is coming back into print in these big Metro book collections. I believe it's on Image, so they're out at your comic shops and all that stuff. But it's a great, just little skewed view of all the superhero tropes that from DC and Marvel. So yeah, that would be on my list for something like that.
Well, I mean, just from the homepage of our website, I would have guessed Fables and Astro City would be on your. If we had an eternity, and an infinitely patient audience.
Fables is a completely different animal, because Fables would be talking about Fables would be talking about literal fairy tale characters. But
and we'd be talking about like a year's worth of podcast episodes.
Oh yeah, It's 150 plus crazy. Issues now. Yeah,
and by the way, when I decided to start that I wanted to start another podcast, and I was chewing on different ideas. The two that I had narrowed it down to were, this pitch that I made to you for independent completed story arcs. I wanted to get away from the grind of doing a podcast on the weekly pool. Like, there's just so much of that.
Yeah.
I'm not reading everything, so there's no reason to do that. You just start ranking your favorite stuff. So it was either going to be this, or I was going to pitch doing a Batman podcast chronologically, doing one episode for every issue ever written, starting with Detective 27, and going through Batman numbered 1 through 850 or whatever. Cause it was just like, there's no thinking required.
That'd be great if all those issues were available. Cause some of the ones early on, not so much. Some of the ones that they've kind of, they're tougher to find. So, but yeah, that'd be, I think
you just kind of put a pin in it and say, we'll try to find a PDF of it somewhere. We'll try to, and I have like a lot of the Batman Golden Age collected editions. But anyway, I thought that would be like fun, and I thought that would be a gimmicky pitch. But in the end, this is the right podcast because there's so much more to talk about.
There's more discussion here. Yeah.
So anyway,
you said you have one more bucket, because I've got a few spare on my list we haven't talked about yet.
Probably
I don't know if they'll fall in this bucket or not. Yeah.
Okay, so this bucket is basically one shots that would
Oh,
be like, I
then
love them,
yes,
but
for the
it
most
would
part.
take
Yeah.
us a
Okay.
lot of work, and it would be one episode, which I think as a listener is probably great to say,
Yeah.
like, I pick up one trade and I
Hmm.
listen to one episode and I don't have to time it and I'm not on
Yeah.
a 3 week grind. Um, but it's just a lot more work for us, especially when we do a zero episode with research and stuff
Yeah.
for each one.
Well,
But
I,
I'm
I've
gonna
got a
rapid
few here. Yeah.
fire.
Yeah. Go.
Um,
Yeah. Read yours off, and I'll read mine.
okay, so Seeds
Oh
by Ann
yeah,
Nesenti and David
David Aha. Yeah.
yeah, which
Yes.
I think was only like, it's like 2 to 4 issues. It's like 100. They're girthy though, so it's like
It
128
was
pages in the trade.
it was supposed to come out in single issues, about 4 issues. It released two, and then it didn't come out, and then eventually just came out as a full trade. So like the
Okay,
last couple
that's what
issues
happened, yeah.
never came out single issue.
Which
But
I
yeah,
have the two, and then I have the trade.
yeah. Seeds is very, very cool.
And that's mostly it is cool, but it's mostly an excuse to talk about David's work because he's mostly in with Marvel.
Well, also, I mean, Ann Nesenti is a X-Men legend for people who read X-Men back in the day. She's one of the
so they're
editors,
both kind of
editors,
deep
and whatnot.
in the big two.
Yeah.
Very cool. I think it was Image. The next is Step by Bloody Step, which was one of my favorite books of 2022.
Wait, sorry, real quick. The Seeds actually was a Dark Horse that was on the Berger Books imprint.
Yes.
Karen Berger,
Okay.
former editor at Vertigo. But yeah. Anyway,
Okay,
sorry.
yeah.
Step by Bloody Step.
Step by Bloody Step, elevator pitch. It's a 4-issue epic with no words.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about what the writer's job is in comics and how, the writer gets all the credit when it's really a visual medium. And there's still reasons for that, and there are good reasons for that. But Step by Bloody Step is Cy Spurrier wrote it, but there are no words. And what I'm really hoping, like, I'll hold off on wanting to do that until I want a deluxe edition of the book with even just a little sample of the script in the back. I just want to see what, because like in your head, like, how do you even talk about it? If you and I wanted to talk about what happens to a character, we have to make up a name for that character so we have a shared reference point. So anyway, it was very fun to read. I read it, and it's just amazing. You don't realize how much you depend on words, even in a visual story, to figure out what's happening. I mean, it's like watching, like, one of my favorite Disney things as a kid was Fantasia. I love that. The same deal. No words, but you can still follow the story. And that one's had the assistance of music.
Yeah.
And a lot of these books coming out now come out with soundtracks or vinyl records, with what's for the
accompaniments. Yeah.
Step by Bloody Step was just a 4-issue masterclass in comic writing.
I mean, the silent issue is a long and proud tradition. I mean, two of the more famous ones, G.I. Joe 21, Silent Interlude, is one of the great issues of all time. And you mentioned David Aja earlier, him and Matt Fraction, Hawkeye 11.
Pizza the Dog.
Which is Pizza Dog, or Pizza's My Business, which is, told from Lucky's point of view, which is effectively a silent issue. So
the risk. I call it a silent issue, even though I love that it's like scratchy. But when he hears a word, he knows.
Which
is like treat or water or
treat,
walk,
water,
or dog.
Hawkeye,
but you see those words.
Effectively silent. Right. But that's a way that the median, that this median is unique in storytelling, where you could have that sort of thing. But the idea that it's a whole series, all 4 issues like that, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. A couple more real quick. I pitched this to you over text last week. Ether Rich. She's a really clever writer, and she's got another series coming out already.
I was just going to say, I think it's called Know Your Station. The first issue, as we're recording this, just came out.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing. And maybe that's the kind of thing maybe we wait on, and we combine those and do them back to back weeks. Yeah, because they are 100%. Similar themes in terms of the idea of talking about the wealth gap and income inequality and things like that. That could be an interesting idea. I had the exact same thought.
Yeah. And Ether Rich, by the way, I did not know her as a creator, but I was lured in by the variant cover on the first issue, which was Jenny Frison, and I will basically buy any Jenny Frison artwork.
Sure.
That comes out now.
Another creator we mentioned along the lines with Scotty Young, Peach Momoko, Art Germ. There are fans that if that cover is out by a certain artist, someone's gonna that there a trove
You
of
know
people
what?
are going to buy every single one.
She has paid me dividends because I also bought number one of Something Is Killing the Children with her
Mm-hmm.
variant because it was Jenny Frison, not because it
Sure,
was something
sure.
that being I said paid dividends. I still have it. I have no intention of selling it. I don't even know how to sell comics and make money. If I took it to a shop, I think they would be like, "I'll give you $8 for it," even though it's like 150 online.
Yeah, you sell
Um,
it online. That's how you sell it. So, but
then you deal with shipping and all this stuff.
oh
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
next one. This one didn't get a lot of love as far as I know. I think it was on Dark Horse. It's called Dark Blood by Latoya Morgan, who's a TV writer, and uh, was an interesting premise, not like totally unique as a premise, but um, it's on Boom. It was a Boom 2021. Um, I liked it quite a bit. It was a 6 issue miniseries with some stunning variant covers. Um, but yeah, basically, a black soldier post World War II, kind of returns home after serving the country, experiences systemic racism, but also gets superpowers um, from a rogue scientist, and has to wrestle with what's my responsibility to my community, what's my you know
Mhm.
how much can I use this to act out in vengeance and self, and uh
There's a hint of Captain America, Red, White, and Black in there, or the Truth, Red, White, and
yes,
Black. The
but I would
Secret Origin of
say
Captain
a
America. Yeah, that's interesting.
darker ending.
Yeah, sure,
So
sure.
and it felt like one of those endings where it was like it felt like you maybe had more to say and you just wrapped it
Mhm.
quickly. And but that's part of comics, like that
Yeah,
just
yeah.
happens.
It
um
does. It does.
uh Another one was uh Carmen by Gilliam March,
Sure.
5 issue fun one. Now another one, this is a twist, and this is another one with a caveat. Haha by W. Maxwell Prince, because W. Maxwell Prince is an artist I'd like to talk about. And Haha, kind of like Ice Cream Man, is kind of an anthology. 6 issues, not necessarily connected, but there are themes, throughout them in the
Hmm.
same way that Ice Cream Man is. But Ice Cream Man's just kind of like pop horror,
Yeah,
and I
it's a good way
enjoy
to
it.
describe it.
I enjoy it, but it is somewhat disposable. Um, and I liked King of Nowhere, and I would love to use that as an excuse to have Hillary Jenkins come back on the podcast. Because she was telling us how weird that one was. And that was another one where like super interesting
It's
premise,
a wild
wild
book. Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Uh, didn't really stick the landing as far as I was concerned.
I would agree with that. Yeah, yeah.
But again, sometimes that can be part of the fodder. Like
Hmm.
I love talking about books, and when I didn't like the ending and dreaming about what they could have been, in the same
Yeah,
way that I like talking about
yeah.
Lost season 7 and what it could have been.
Sure, sure,
Um,
sure.
uh, okay, so here's a twist that you probably didn't see coming. Last Ronin.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
if we go Teenage
TMNT.
Mutant Ninja Turtles, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah,
kind of a genre buster for us.
yeah.
But
That was a really great book, though. It's a
certainly
really,
an
really great book.
earth-shattering comic book that
Yeah.
I don't think anyone saw coming. Just went to like 5, 6 printings on like every single issue.
Oh, they did. Sold out. It sold
And
out huge when it came.
it's finally in trade, which is why I put it on the list now.
Yeah.
So that'd be super fun. I was a big Turtles fan as a kid. Um, Another one that's kind of a bender in terms of this was Vertigo imprint was Dark Knight Story by Paul Dini, which is an autobiographical piece about his own life when he was mugged.
Yeah.
And he had a hard time coming back to write Batman after experiencing violent crime firsthand. Uh, and meanwhile he's working on Animaniacs or whatever. Really, really fun, sad story. Beautifully told, and Eduardo Riso did the artwork, which is he's famous from 100 Bullets, a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
I really like that one. That's another one shot where it's like, oh, so much work to put into one. And then the other one, and this was, if we don't do Undiscovered Country, I would pitch 80 After Death as a way to get Scott Snyder in the discussion.
That'd be a tough one. Will we do that as one or do that as three? Because there are
I think
three oversized magazine style.
I know. I think it is
books,
one though, because
yeah, maybe so.
because it's another one of those that's on the fence of not enough meat on the bones.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the premise alone of it being a future world and people live for thousands of years, and you can't even remember more than a couple 100 years at a time. Like your memory fades. Are you even the same person anymore?
Indeed.
And then the loop ending, or the possible loop ending, or is he being gaslit? And you never get resolution. It's one where the reader decides, and I love it. So
yep.
Anyway, that's my list of one-shot pitches.
All right. I got a couple that fall into the one shot, and then I got a few others that like really maybe I'll just tack them on at the end here. But the first one shot I have is a book called it's a book from Boom. It's called Last Sons of America. It was a 4-issue series, I think. It's written by Philip Kennedy Johnson.
Definitely sounds like a rally I would not want to go to.
I did. I'll explain the premise here. Written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, who I think this is his first comic work. He's now like big time. Really at DC, he's done a lot of stuff at DC with Action and Superman and things like that. Also at Marvel now as well. I think he's written some of the Alien Predator stuff. Art on this book was by Matthew Dow Smith. And this premise is, what if Elmore Leonard wrote the movie Children of Men?
That's great. That's great.
And I think that feels like
I like Elmore Leonard, right?
Yeah. So it's a super high concept crime thriller. The idea is that some sort of biological attack has rendered America, the people of America, unable to conceive children. So the only way children can come into America is by adoption through other countries. And so obviously that leads to some sort of shady black market stuff, blah, 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 blah. And so this is a story of that, of two guys who go out and basically essentially create a market. Like you go and buy children from other countries and bring them to America for people that want to have children. So it has this kind of dystopian feel to it. But it's a very tight kind of crime thriller with this kind of dystopian fantasy overlay on top of it. So it's a really cool book. I think it's 4 or 5 issues. I think it's 4 issues. But it's just the one volume that again, be a lot of work to get through. But I think if either of those things, Children of Men, the movie, or Elmore Leonard, if that's in your wheelhouse, this is a book I think you'll enjoy to read.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say a similar vibes to Made in Korea.
Last Sons of America, there was talk of it being optioned because the two main characters are brothers, and one of the brothers is a little person, and obviously I think Peter Dinklage was attached to this to like play this part. And I don't know if it went anywhere. Obviously it didn't. It had been a while, but it's one of those books that I don't want to say feel cinematic, but you read it and you see like, okay, I can see how this would be a movie.
Right.
The issue there would become is you're towing the line of, well, we've seen Children of Men. So like, there's it's a second cousin to that movie and that same storyline, but it's a really cool book that kind of came and went 5 or 6 years ago that I don't think a lot of people read. It was kind of the early part of what we mentioned in our Grass King Zero issue of kind of Boom's ascendancy. It was an early part of that before it started to really hit a little big. So Last Sons of America, a good book that, maybe we could, be a lot of work to get through, but I think someone that people should read. The other one shot that I have was from Dark Horse. And this is just a graphic novel. It's called Two Brothers by Fabio Moon and Gabriel Ba.
Now, that's not the book I would have expected from you.
Well, so
from those creators, but go on.
I mentioned this because this is a book I don't think we would do. Moon and Ba are they're twins from Brazil. They're collaborations. They both write, they both draw. They're very similar styles. But this specifically is an adaptation of like one of the best-selling Brazilian novels of all time. I guess it's a book called The Brothers by what the original author name is Milton Hatum. I'm not trying to pronounce that. Apologies.
Just say it confidently the same way that I do with the brothers. Yeah. The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky.
Work your way through it. Yeah. But this is an adaptation. It is a book about a about twin brothers who kind of their lives separate and they come back, and it's dealing with life and loss. And so it's an interesting idea, the fact that you have twin brothers who are the creatives adapting this book about twin brothers that deals with these heavy things of life and loss and things like that. I mention it here as a book that probably we wouldn't do, because the book I do want to do from them is Day Tripper, which is a 12-issue series from Vertigo.
Also not good bedtime reading.
Very tough, very tough. But it is a beautiful, beautiful story that we could either do in like 2 issues, 6 and 6, or all at one. I don't know, but Day Tripper is one of my all-time favorite books. And so if we never get to that, I don't know if we ever would, but their adaptation of two brothers, you get a sense of how Moon and Bao work together, and what their style is and the kind of themes they like to hit on. So it's a book that I think, again, people should go out and read. But yeah, Day Tripper is the one I really want to do on the show eventually, if we can make that possible.
Yeah. I own both. I've only read Day Tripper.
Yeah.
But it's on my list. So
yeah. All right. So do you have any more? Any books, any stragglers that don't fall in any category?
I have 2 that don't fall in any category.
All right. I've got 3 that on the end here. So why don't we end with those here? Why don't you go with what your kind of other 2 that are just kind of out there?
Okay. So here are my ones that I have not read, but they've been on my list forever. And they seem up the alley.
Okay.
And the first would be Alex and Ada.
Sure. Oh, that's another
just
book.
Came out in a beautiful deluxe edition.
I'm in a similar boat. That's one I look at all the time. Be like,
seems like it's very similar to the movie Her, or the movie Ex Machina. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Ex Machina probably a little closer. But yes. I agree. That's a book that I've seen tons of and be like, I should read. I think it's another pair of brothers.
And
too,
I just bought the big Image deluxe edition. So nice, beautiful edition on my shelf. I'm sure I'll read it hopefully over Christmas. Then I realized my 2 is actually 3.
Okay, well, whatever. Go ahead.
No one listening at this point will be surprised that we have a lot of books to talk about.
I know. How about that?
So one, a request from my wife, who is not a comic reader. So I bought comics at her request, which is Umbrella Academy.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So she wants to see the series.
Okay.
And she was like, I always read the book before I watch things. It's a comic book and I don't read comic books, but she watches like all the Marvel movies, but that's simpler because the Marvel movies are never,
they're not straight up. They're not straight out
a 1-to-1.
Yeah.
It's always a blender of a few popular influences.
So I need to watch the rest of Umbrella Academy. I have fallen behind on that, but
I assume you read it all.
Yes, I read it all. I really loved the first 2 volumes. I thought the third one was weak. There was a big gap. Not a delay. There was a big gap between when they finished the second volume, which is called Dallas, and when they eventually released the third volume, which was called Hotel Oblivion. There was a very large gap, for whatever reason, and in terms of the people involved. It's, for those who don't know, it's Gerard Way, who's the lead singer of My Chemical Romance, and Gabriel Ba, who I just mentioned. He is the one of the brothers of what I just mentioned. But yeah, that would be a cool one. So you have not read? Have you not seen the show or read the book?
Correct. I'm totally fresh on that.
Okay.
And I think I could keep it that way. And then the third one is the comic Snowpiercer, which I kind of on a whim. There was a local comic shop, had a box set of them used for $15 and was doing an absurd 40% off everything in the store sale. And I was like, I think for like $8, I got all 3 trades. And I think I want to say it's an older book that was like republished, and it was originally published in French.
I don't
80s.
know that. I don't know how old it is. I know it's foreign language, but that would be interesting. Yeah. I have never read. I've only ever seen the movie. I know. I think there was a TV show that apparently did pretty good.
I think it did well. Yeah, I think both the movie and the show.
Well, the movie's great. I love the movie. But
the strange thing to me was, so the movie was pitched to me as an adaptation of like a loosely based on the video game BioShock. And I was like, oh, okay. And I started watching it and I was like, I mean, this is good, but this is not BioShock.
Either that person has never seen the movie or never played BioShock, or both.
I think both. But
Like
I mean, I think we
I
were
never
talking
played
about
BioShock, but I know what BioShock's about, and yeah,
right.
that's
But I think it was like the critique of Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's type
okay,
worldview.
sure,
And if
okay,
they were both doing that, then it's like sure. But almost everything is
a
based
critique of
on
that.
BioShock. Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
If that's how we define based on BioShock. But with the comic is the source material and it comes from 1982, then it would be more accurate to say BioShock is based on that. I'm
Yes.
very pedantic about those type of chronology things. Just because something entered your consciousness second doesn't mean it entered the world second.
Yes, yes, yeah.
So anyway, so that's
That'd be
um,
cool. That'd be because again, that's a book also I haven't read. But yeah, I obviously I know the story from the movie, so that would be interesting. That'd be interesting. Yep.
yeah. So that's the qualified end of my list,
All right.
and I have one surprise bucket at the end that is
Okay. All right.
of
Well,
the
well.
pipe dream.
All right. Let me do my last three here that I have.
Yes,
The first one I have is a Dark Horse book, which is Black Sad,
I
by
knew that
Juan
was
Diaz
coming. I knew
Canales
that was
and
coming.
Juanjo Guarnidino. Again, I apologize. I don't have the confidence to just be wrong like Mike. I try, but Black Sad. I mean, it's a wild premise. It's two Spanish creators who wrote a comic originally published in French about anthropomorphic animals in post-war America, 1950s America, and it's none of that should make any sense. That's just word salad there. But it's an incredible crime noir. It's probably my favorite crime noir comic not written by Brubaker and Phillips.
There it is.
And
I knew
yes,
that
they
caveat
are.
was coming.
Yeah, they are. You know, the main character John Blacksad is an anthropomorphic cat. Think the really reductive way is think Zootopia meets Sin City.
Oh, that's actually a great pitch.
Yeah, but so you can read this book and the way, if you've seen Zootopia, just the way that the animals interact with each other and how they carry themselves as anthropomorphized, like that fits perfectly with what Black Sad does. It's just the tone is like gritty, hard-boiled detective PI work. But it's an incredible comic. It is technically still ongoing. They're in the middle of a storyline right now. Parts 1 and 2 are out. Parts 3 and 4 come out either next year or 2024. I don't know. It takes them a super long time to put these books out, and when you flip through them, you'll understand why. The art in it is just beautifully painted, beautifully rendered. Just a phenomenal looking book. Just absolutely stunning. So
Plus, they've made a extremely positively reviewed video game.
Yes,
Black
which
Sad.
is fun. It's one of the few video games that I have and play because it came on a Switch, and if it wasn't on a Switch, I wouldn't have played it. Which I'm really glad it came on the one system that I own and use. But yeah, it's fantastic, and they do a great job in there of character design, of bringing the characters the way they're styled into that 3D rendered world. So it's a great place to be in, great universe to be in, to tell really cool. Again, they're crime noir stories. They're just hardboiled detective stories. Like anything else, you're looking at a 6-foot cat who stands on his hind legs. You get past it, but it's a great book.
You've been in my house. You don't have to sell me on anything cat based.
That is true. John Blacksad would be very similar to your cat Fitz, black and white. Kind of, yeah, it's and that plays a role in terms of the fact of which animals are white and which animals are not. That plays
twist.
a role because there is a lot of commentary in these books about the world, and especially in this time here, which again, this is set in post World War II America, 1950s America. So yeah, there's a lot of other commentary. It just they happen to be animals, and so you can get away with stuff. But it's a great book that I think people either know it and love it or never heard of it and read it. So you should definitely check out Black Sad. All right. The second one on my list here on the kind of random list is a series of 4 graphic novels called November by writer Matt Fraction and artist Elsa Chartier. It is they did these 4 graphic novels very similar to what people are doing. Like I mentioned what Marjorie Liu and Sonata Takeda are doing with their individual graphic novels. Brubaker and Phillips are doing that with the Reckless series, just not putting out individual issues, just putting out a full graphic novel, and it is a series. And these 4 books, they just tell the story of one kind of chaotic night. You got 3 different women in this city who are all pulled together into the criminal underworld, and it's just kind of this crazy, violent, kind of out of hand night. And just tells this kind of crime story from these 3 outsiders to the world who get dragged in kind of unwittingly into it. But it's super cool. It's super stylized. Elsa Chartier, her art is awesome. It's, again, she's one of my all-time favorites. And she hasn't done a lot of interior work. This is something she had done this year. She had done kind of very little interior work, some of her own stuff on like Kickstarter and things like that. She's currently doing the book Love Everlasting with Tom King, which is fantastic. But seeing her here with Fraction doing these 4 full graphic novel length stories, each one of them, in this series it's very cool. It's very clean. It has kind of this retro old school feel to the way she draws characters and all that. Is very simple, very clean lines. But it's also a very, very engrossing story. It kind of you get these kind of mystery pieces as you follow these 3 different characters, and as you move through the story, you see how they all fit together and how all 3 stories are actually one story. And so it's a really cool, another kind of crime noir setting kind of story that, again, I don't know if we'd ever talk about, but it's a cool book to go read.
No, I love that, because that's a book that I've wondered about before, because when I discovered far too late on the scene Matt Fraction's Hawkeye, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is a genius. He just gets character, he gets story, he gets humor. And so I was like, surely I will like whatever he did independently better than what he did with Marvel. And I grabbed one of his books that only did one trade and people hated it on Image. And I was like, oh, I guess he's not infallible. And then I saw November and I was like,
what did you read? Did you pick up Casanova?
No. Casanova, I think, did 2 trades or went.
Casanova had I think 3 different storylines. That's with Moon and Ba as well. But
yeah,
what was the Fraction story you picked up?
Oh boy, I want to say is Matt Fraction ODYC.
Oh, Odyssey. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Odyssey. Yeah.
I never read that one.
Yeah, much maligned, and it was more the nothingness and banality of it than being bad.
Sure.
But I think by the time people made their way over to him, they had high hopes, and that's the problem of having early success is, everything is a letdown.
In general, Fraction stuff is really, really good. All the stuff he's done, I think the vast majority of his creator-owned stuff is really good. Again, Odyssey I never read, but most of the stuff is really good, and I'd recommend it. And November is no exception to that. So my last one is an interesting one, mainly because it's something I want to reread myself now, maybe not just for the podcast, just for my own kind of personal edification. And it's called Unfollow. It's a Vertigo book from 2015, 2017, in that range, written by Rob Williams, art by Michael Dowling. And it's a book, it's not even a thinly veiled metaphor for Twitter. The app it's a story about a billionaire tech genius who creates an app, social media app. I think it's called Chirper. It's Twitter, whatever it is. But this tech billionaire, he's dying. He has terminal illness. And so he invites like 140 random users, because again, 140 used to be the number of characters in a tweet. Now it's 280, and apparently it's going to be 4,000. But he invites 140.
You have to pay for it, though.
Yeah, he invites 140 random users to his private island because he's going to give his billions of dollars away to them. And naturally, the story just evolves as people are greedy and all that stuff there. But what I find interesting is that it's an obvious commentary on our use of social media at the time. But again, that was 2015, 2016, 2017. This book was coming out. Our relationship to social media has changed drastically, even from that time to now. So it's a book that I think has a very obvious message on some of the ills and perils of social media, but I'd be curious to go back to read it now, in our current view of social media, especially as something like Twitter is imploding and falling apart, and see if it's better or worse. It's like, see, is it more prescient or is it completely dated and out of touch? I don't know. But the fact that it really was rooted in its time, in the moment of like I said, it came out, first issue came out in 2015, ended in 2017. I think it was 18 total issues. So just the idea that a book could still be relevant, but is it, like I said, reading it now, because I haven't read it since it first came out. So like, does it hit harder now, or is it a complete swing and miss? Because even in the 5 years since, said our understanding and relationship to social media is so radically different than what it was then. And at the time, it was about 5 years on-ish from when social media first dawned, when it first kind of came to prominence. So, even in the lifespan of something like Twitter, our understanding of it and our use of it has changed so radically that I wonder how this book ages. That's really kind of comes down to, does this book age well or does it age poorly? I don't know. I remember thinking the book had a neat idea. There were some very tropey characters, as you would expect. Again, where the base idea is random strangers thrown on an island and they decide how to split billions of dollars, So what happens if someone dies, it's split 140 ways, but if someone dies, then it's split 139 ways. So the number keeps going down and down and down. And so that's what the story is about. That's the narrative part of the story. But I wonder about the themes and what it's trying to say about social media and our interaction with each other through the internet and virtually and all that. I wonder if it is any better or worse now. So I bring it up.
That makes good fodder, and I think you could read that back to back with like Thumbs by Sean Lewis, which was about that was a cynical forecast of social media. Well, and like I said, I don't think Unfollow is meant to be a forecast. It was meant to be a commentary on where we were with something like Twitter at the exact moment. So it wasn't like he was saying this is what's going to lead to. He's saying this is where we are with it. And so that's why I wonder, going back, has it aged at all? Has it aged well? Does it read better or does it read worse now? So it's something that I think people could, it's an interesting read to go back and go through, because I don't think it I don't want to say it got lost in the shuffle there, but it kind of did, because it was kind of the tail end of Vertigo, as Vertigo as a actual line, as an actual imprint was on its last leg. So it's one of the kind of the last Vertigo books that came out. So it's an interesting book, interesting premise that I personally would just want to go back to, just again to see how it reads now. Yeah, no, I mean that's a compelling pitch. Yeah, frankly, there's nothing we covered here that I think I wouldn't do. Because even some of the throwaway ones that we started with on Not Enough Meat on the Bones, I'm like, we can always find something to talk about. Well, it wasn't no meat on the bones. It was not enough meat on the bones. So that implies there's something there. You're like definitely Carl Weathers in Arrested Development. You're like, you pull that bone out of there, you got yourself a stew. Yeah. I mean, obviously we threw out a lot of books. We threw out a lot of books. So, but there's a lot of stuff there that a lot of fodder for stuff. So, but you said you had one last one. Oh no, mine's a cheat. Okay. Okay. So, I don't think you've ever done a foray into this, but new to me in 2022 was reading manga. Oh, sure. And the Death Note thing kept coming up during Kill or Be Killed because of the Kira character. But I have just continued to enjoy that series, even as I've been reading, the regular fiction that I go through and the comics that I'm going through in my regular life, plus the comics for the podcast, plus I've added this manga, and I just stumbled across manga because a manga shop, the only manga only shop in Cincinnati, opened right next to my house, and I was like, it's a small bookstore, I gotta go support it. So I just went in there and started asking, and it is just stunning to me how little overlap there is between comic readers and manga readers. There could be 20 people in that shop, and I can say, like, hey, does anybody else here read comics? If so, what would you recommend? And you just get blank looks. They're like, comics, like reading left or right? And I'm like, yeah, no, like American comics. This is why a sizable industry. People talk about the death of
the American comic industry and the growth of manga. And really the idea is like they're not cannibalizing readers. Like you're not losing readers or gaining in either way. Like they're different audiences and both can exist.
Oh,
But
for
yeah,
sure. Yeah.
yeah,
And so the series that I've really enjoyed, and they're two longer series, are Death Note and Full Metal Alchemist. Both of which I'd like. I think those would not count as like indie creator owned. They're both huge properties.
yeah.
Death Note's getting a Duffer Brother adaptation for Netflix
Mhm.
after already having gotten a live adaptation. Plus, it has a full anime. Full Metal Alchemist has an anime and a flopped Netflix movie, but it sounds like they're going to try to do it again.
Sure. There's
Um,
always another swing at it.
but the indie manga I've been reading is one called Lost Lad London, which is you know, two British guys, one a detective, one a college student. The college student is framed for murder. Detective befriends him, is both investigating him while also trying to help him from being investigated because he's pretty sure the guy's innocent, but can't be sure. And it's just a great detective story that's just using the medium of manga. And I'm like, I feel like if people were enjoying the Brubaker Phillips noir stuff or some of the other detective stuff, there's no reason they wouldn't enjoy Lost Lad London, but they would never find it because it's manga. And so that type of thing would be really interesting to me. That being said, that has the problem we have come up against several times tonight. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
The next volume comes out January 17th. That's like that and Spy Family are my only pools. Like they're the only current manga that I'm reading. And Spy Family is not one to discuss. It's just hilarious. It's just my wife and I both laughed out loud in rooms by ourselves reading this manga, and we got our daughter's name from reading this manga. So our daughter's name is Anya. So if there are any Anya Forger fans out there, that is where I got my daughter's name, which I felt my wife and I thought was like really funny and really cute or whatever. And then when people ask where you got it from, you're like, I don't know. We just found it.
It just came to us. I don't know.
Yeah. So like my sister-in-law sleuthed it out and she was like, I was telling someone from work that your daughter's name was Anya. And she said, oh, is he a fan of Spy Family? And my sister-in-law was like, well, I don't know what that is. And she texted me. She was like, are you a fan of something called Spy X Family? And I was like, oh no, she figured it out.
Busted.
So,
Busted.
Then she was here at Thanksgiving and I was like, yeah, you should read the books. They're pretty funny. I think you'd like them. And I handed it to her and she was like, why is this backwards? And I was like, because like the binding and everything looks, weird when it's right to left. And I was like, and she was like, I don't know if I could read that. I'm like, I assure you could. Children could read this.
It's actually not that hard. So
it's not that hard. No, I learned to read Hebrew, which is right to left. And that was hard, not because it was right to left, but because it was Hebrew. And I was like, where are the vowels?
It's a different challenge right there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you all for listening, not just today, but this year. As always, find us on our website, storiedarcs.com. Twitter, Storied Arcs, for however long that website continues to exist. And Instagram, we keep moderately active there. But through our meager efforts on Twitter and Instagram, we've connected with Hillary Jenkins, insanely talented artist, who, by the way, I commissioned a painting for my daughter's room. That is in the mail coming my way right now.
Oh, most excellent.
Yeah, and it was I don't want to say the price because it was very reasonable for a commission painting because I want to give her freedom to raise her rates.
That's awesome.
Which are too low. But yeah, commission painting, and it was a whole collaborative process where, she asked what we're into and, things that are important to us or if there are any like pictures from favorite vacation spots or anything. So I sent her all this stuff and she just came back with a beautiful image. So great connection there. I would love to get more creators on the show. Mark Russell, we didn't exactly get him on the show, but he did record something and email it to me.
Yeah.
And I will forever have the little Gmail star next to the email from Mark Russell.
No, that was very cool of him. Very, very kind and generous to do that for us.
So, and I feel like there are just a ton of really great human beings out there making comics.
Yeah.
And we want to shine a spotlight on them. Would love to connect with them as much as they're willing. And if you have not yet gone to Kickstarter and supported Hillary Jenkins' project Reburn, that is continuing with a few more issues. And I've gotten a verbal agreement from the head creator of Reburn to come on our podcast. So that's certainly something to look forward to in 2023.
Yeah, that could be awesome.
That's another one that is like, are you guys going to keep making them as long as Kickstarter keeps producing money? If so, it's kind of not what we do here, but also I'm not inclined to turn down a creator interview.
Yeah. No, that could be great. I mean, we could cover, just really just want to have the interview with the first, just that first arc that was out. We can play that by ear if they're willing to come on and talk to us about their book. That'd be cool.
I mean, even if they don't want to talk specifically about the book, anything about the creative process, they can tell us.
Yeah.
I felt like hearing Hillary talk about that particular piece of the process where, yes, the script is already written, the pencils are penciled, and you're doing, the ink is ink and you're coloring. What is your contribution to the story?
Yeah.
With just coloring.
Sure.
And it's huge, especially in Grass Kings, as we discussed.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that was really awesome.
Lots of great stuff already behind us, and lots more coming. Thank you all for listening. And this was our holiday wish list of things we want to talk about in the upcoming months. The other thing on my wish list would be like, let's get a few more listeners. If you're enjoying the podcast, share it with a friend. I don't like doing self promotion. I like for our work to speak for itself. That being said, I think the more listeners we have, it's not about ego, it's about attracting artists. If they can appeal to a larger audience, they'll be more likely to come, and we'll be able to shine a better spotlight on them and just create a great reciprocity with creators. So anyway,
so that's why we do it. We'll want to shine the light on the people who deserve all the credit. So
yep. Exactly. So anyway, we'll just be behind the scenes, pointing at them and taking partial credit for the podcast. So anyway, thank you for listening. Have a great end of the year, and we will see you in 2023.
Peace.